Welcome to the first episode of The Man Who Woke Up the Buddha, a project I've been working on in various forms since around 2010. I like to think of it as a deconstruction and celebration of my 50-plus year walk on the wild side of spiritual paths, esoteric strangeness, and everyday life in the late 20th and early 21st century. Any resemblance to people living or dead is only vaguely intentional. Episode 1. Sid realizes he's the Buddha, even though he barely knows who the guy is. At 10:33 p.m. one summer evening, an irrepressibly irreverent 60-something businessman from Boston named Sidney, husband of 1, father of 3, and grandfather of 6, had 3 transcendent experiences: an orgasm, a seizure, and the realization he was the Buddha. Well, half decent for someone your... His wife Diane's voice trailed off as she felt him collapse onto his back and start mumbling incoherently. At first she thought it might just be a classic Sid shtick, but when she saw the right side of his face go slack and drool beginning to appear at the corner of his mouth, she grabbed her cell phone. "My husband's having some kind of seizure, I think." Sid began to mutter. "No, what?" As Di began to answer dispatcher's questions. "He's 67. Nell!" Sid shouted. "Sid!" She said it sharply, wanting it to be a dream, to slap him out of it. "Yeah, he's breathing." "What? Now?" It was like a little kid whining. Di took a deep breath and put the phone on speaker as the dispatcher passed her up the critical event ladder. Yes. No, he's never had a seizure." "It just falls back to the bed," she said, picking his arm up and dropping it. "Are you kidding? Repeat what words? I don't think he even hears me." No, there are no animals in the house," Diane said, covering the phone. Downstairs, Biecha, their Portuguese water dog, left her guard station and bounded up the stairs. Sid's head rolled back and forth. "Now? What?" He looked around with glazed eyes, as if to see who had said those words. "Enough questions. Hurry," Diane said after repeating their address. "Stay here," she said to Biecha, as she pulled herself away to go downstairs and unlock the door. Biecha jumped up on the bed, analyzed the situation, and began to lick Sid's face like she'd seen Lassie do when Timmy got hurt on the Saturday morning reruns she watched with Sid. When Di got back, Sid was speaking in another voice, from back in his throat, a whisper. Gati, Papa Gati. Sam Gati, buddy, like a nursery rhyme. He drifted in and out as the EMTs arrived, strapped him on the gurney, and loaded him into the ambulance. One of the EMTs waved Di away from the back and pointed towards the front door. She looked at him in disbelief. At times like this, there were 2 people you wanted on your side. Since God was off somewhere creating another universe, Di was your next best bet. She just shook her head at the EMT like he'd made some inexcusable error and climbed into the back. On the way to the hospital, Sid's voice and vocabulary roller-coastered from nursery rhymes and playground chants to religious hymns, body bar tunes, and sacred chants. Karma, Dharma, Pasta, Tantra, Kyrie, Gloria, candy, dandy, liquor, quicker. Mary had a little llama. Sid spent the next day in a blur of bright lights and electronic sound effects as he went through an alphabet soup of tests, which he later claimed to have passed with flying colors. EEG, EKG, MRI, PET, SPECT, and SISCOM. Meanwhile, the Buddha watched over his wondrous, strange, new incarnation. What, or rather whom, had he gotten himself into this time? As he went in and out of consciousness, Sid heard vague talk about a tumor, the need for surgery, and what to tell the grandkids. He occasionally tried to join in the conversation, but his words were slurred, and his comments were usually irrelevant or inappropriate, except when he muttered the magic words, endless suffering, which earned him more painkillers from the ever-changing lineup of nurses who insisted he tell them his birth date before they gave him drugs, to which he usually mumbled, 650 BC. On the morning of the third day, he was rolled down to the operating room, where a surgeon removed a right parietal brain tumor about 5 centimeters, fresh, with several tissue fragments of white-red neural tissue from Sid's cranium. Using the latest model, multifunction medical drill, the surgeon bored a couple of holes large enough to insert a special saw and, by using retractors, opened a horseshoe-shaped flap in Sid's head. Then he really got down to business, doing things to Sid's brain that would have impressed even Torquemada, the Spanish inquisitor who was willing to use waterboarding and worse to convert non-Catholics, for their own good, of course. After removing as much as he could of the nasty little tumor, the doctor screwed the flap back to Sid's ravaged cranium using titanium plates and screws, sealing the whole thing with some kind of medical-grade caulk, and then wrapping his head in enough gauze to get Sid held for questioning at a TSA checkpoint. Since they needed Sid awake during the surgery, the anesthesiologist had thoughtfully infiltrated epinephrine into a linear incision, so Sid was able to provide color commentary, such as, a little more off the top. What, me worry? And I'm keeping an open mind. He felt like a reverse ventriloquist. His head was immobilized. Only his mouth moved. After doing some hard time, as he later put it, in the ICU, Sid returned to some semblance of consciousness late the next afternoon and found himself in a hospital suite with oversized and overstuffed maroon chairs, an executive desk, and a fully stocked kitchenette. All the walls were painted in celadon as opposed to hospital green, with the mauve trim only a designer could love. While there were some hospital-like plugs and connectors behind him, most of the wires and tubes had been snaked through the bed frame to be virtually invisible, and the place smelled like the massage room of some New Age retreat, subtle lavenders and sandalwood. It was the kind of place where young movie stars went to give birth, and aging politicians went to die. The only indications that it was a hospital room were a top-of-the-line electronic medical records monitor, which Sid later insisted revealed everything but his sperm count, along with a whole lot of bells, whistles, pull chains on the wall, and the IV drip, whom he soon christened Igor. Everything else was there for Sid's amusement. The pile of remotes, one for the TV, one for the bed, and one to let the nurse know you needed to pee, or were about to go into cardiac arrest. The deluxe rolling side table had buttons on the side to raise and lower it, as well as to extend the top like airplane flaps, reaching out to catch some air. After many more insistently timeless moments, wandering through various unfamiliar states of unconsciousness, subconsciousness, and drug-induced superconsciousness, Sid suddenly became aware of himself feeling and thinking like, well, himself, but also like, well, someone else. And that someone else was, well, the Buddha. Of course, Sid had heard of the Buddha. You don't make it from the 60s to your 60s without hearing about this guy who sat under a tree for years until he achieved enlightenment, which sounded like a nice place to visit, but Sid wasn't sure he wanted to live there. Sid had also been in meetings where people talked about how much meditation helped them deal with stress. But he'd never had all that much stress, nothing that a shot of Jameson's couldn't take care of. He'd heard people talk about how their business ethics were based on Buddhist principles, but he found it easier just to do the right thing. And Diane had a friend who was always going on and on about how much happier she'd been since she'd gone to some Buddhist place to get enlightened, which involved many hours of meditating, not talking, and eating vegetarian food, none of which particularly appealed to Sid. And besides, he was already pretty happy. But whenever he tried to shrug off the realization that he was the Buddha as just a little post-stroke psychosis fueled by whatever euphoric concoction they were putting into that IV drip, a bolt of blazing hot lightning shot through the stitches in the crown of his head and slowed to an excruciating crawl scorching both amygdalae before taking a hard right and exiting through his left temple. That might have been the cancer talking, but after several of those attacks, Sid had no interest in listening. The morning after the surgery, Sid opened his eyes and saw Di leaning over to give him a kiss on the forehead. She looked haggard. "You look long-suffering," Sid said as she stood up. "I've been married to you for 45 years. She took her bag off the chair next to the bed and turned back to give him a pale, wan smile. "Your turn," she said, looking in the direction of the window. "Yeah, go get some rest, Di," a voice said, coming from the same direction. Perfect, Sid thought. It was the voice of his friend Marcus. Next week, episode 2. Sid is possessed. Or, Sid makes his confession. I'm not sure what to call it yet. By the way, pretty soon I'll create a glossary of words and phrases as we need them. For now, I'll just give away the fact that strange chanting above was Sid's delusional version of the Tibetan prayer for the dead, which goes, Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisvaha. That translates to gone, 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 beyond, gone, utterly beyond, enlightenment, hail! A prayer that is highly unlikely Sid has ever heard.